Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about The House on Caple Hill, which is Wren's graphic novel, and we're going to be talking about the art style they're using. Specifically, their artistic influences, what kind of manga has influenced the art style, and how their style has evolved over the years.
It's a pleasure to be back.
I know this is really exciting because there's this is a picture that Ren drew, and you can see all of their influences here and we're going to be starting from right to left. So you can see there's a lot of different things here: anime, manga, some cartoons, and I think that is Art Nouveau, right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Right. So there's an art movement in there as well. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Sailor Moon on the right.
Yeah, Sailor Moon was definitely a huge influence on me. I was definitely one of those kids. I feel like it's a whole generation that's like, yeah, I grew up watching Sailor Moon. There was something about the art style that I just absolutely adored, that it was almost just existed to be pretty. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that's something that stuck with me forever. And it made me want to draw. I was always drawing characters, trying to draw sailors, stuff like that. Um,
Hmm.
and I wanted to draw like that, but I didn't understand how to do that. And it set me down a long road of trying to draw anime. And
So
I stay
Tete
trying.
Tete's actually watching our stream right now, and she says, "Hey
Ah,
there, my lovelies."
hi, Tete. So glad you're
Yeah,
here.
thank you for joining. This is really exciting because it's been a while since someone has joined our streams, and every time someone can join and comment, I can actually do something on Restream that shows their comment at the bottom.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, exactly. So every time Tete says something, we can show it at the bottom here.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, Sailor Moon was definitely something big in the 2000s and 90s. And, it had a lot of great artistic styles that were really inspirational to a lot of people. What was the most charming thing about Sailor Moon to you as a kid? And even now?
Um, so the funny thing is that now I kind of look back on it and I recognize, because I'm also very much a fan of older manga and anime, as is going to come up. And you know, Manga from the 60s and 70s and even from the 50s had a very particular style to it, and anime style has evolved over the years. And people can even say that the 90s anime had a very specific style and a specific flavor. And I feel like Sailor Moon is a great example of an anime that does both. Like, yes, is she definitely a modern, hip 90s, 2000s teen? Yes. But does she also keep some of the style and little nods to the artwork of the mangaka of the 1960s and 70s? She absolutely does. The streaming
Hmm.
hair, the giant sparkling eyes, there's just certain things about the style that is evocative of um older anime and manga styles, and I
Hmm.
love that. I appreciate that so much. Um, I think also for me as a kid, it was really cool to see a show that was just about girl superheroes in a kind of way, and they're also normal teenagers who have very different personalities and interesting things that they get up to when they're not saving the world. Um, and I think that from American, um, or maybe I should, yeah, I think I'm going to say American production companies, whatever you want to call it, it's less common.
Hmm. Right, especially during that age, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, you had your X-Men that included a pretty diverse cast, but there was never, you know, there weren't really any like heroic figures that were marketed towards girls, towards little girls specifically.
Hmm. How about Powerpuff Girls?
I was actually not allowed to watch Powerpuff Girls as a kid. My mom had a lot of weird, I don't know what her deal was. I snuck a few episodes here and there, but I didn't watch it religiously as a kid. So that one kind of evaded me oddly.
I see. What is that little creature underneath Sailor Moon? Is it also from anime?
Oh, so that the one with the bat wings and the little ball, that is a Moogle, and those are from Final Fantasy. Um,
Oh.
and I kind of wanted something that could be an easily recognizable little thing that people would recognize. That's Yoshitaka Amano's work. He did character design for I think he's done character design for every Final Fantasy game, and I remember watching my brothers play. I loved those games, and just poring over the books that came for these games because I loved the artwork so much. And if you look up other stuff that he's done, you could definitely say of Amano that he is like the pinnacle of Japanese Nouveau. So his
Mhm.
work is just so elegant and sumptuous, and that always spoke to me, definitely.
Right. And Tete said, yes, Final Fantasy. Absolutely amazing work, especially with his concept designs. Yes.
Yeah.
Tete has talked about Amano as well. I think he was one of her biggest inspirations, especially since I believe he has done a lot of gothic style work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'd say that he is absolutely a Gothic Nouveau artist. He can do lighter stuff, and but I think it's his darker stuff that's really appreciated. And interestingly, he actually has a few pieces that he's done that were operas. Uh, and my favorite work of his was his painting of the Flying Dutchman, which is kind of more in line with his gothic sensibilities than most of the Final Fantasy stuff was.
Right. And below the Moogle, I believe, is one of the Totoros from My Neighbor Totoro, which is a Miyazaki movie. It's the white one that looks like a ghost.
Yeah, yeah, it's the Baby Totoro. That movie, like, I watched that more religiously than I watched Disney when I was a little kid. That was my first like VHS that belonged to me. That movie is so special, and a lot of Miyazaki's work has been super influential and inspirational in my um, the way I want to create art, the things I want to make, the things I want to express in my art has definitely had a lot of influence from Ghibli on the whole.
Right. Is it especially the sense of wonder?
Yeah, I would say the sense of wonder. I think, especially in the earlier Ghibli films, there is a sense of nostalgia, even in his more serious work, like Princess Mononoke. There's a sense that these worlds we're seeing are so lived in and they're so familiar. Um, and I love the quality of that mixture of whimsy and nostalgia.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, definitely his worlds feel very lived in. Even if we're not given, a huge tome of information about the world, it just feels so alive. I think that's why he's very successful as a work, to me, especially since, I don't really have the time to read through, five tomes of detail about fantasy worlds. But then he makes his worlds it's just this when you watch it, it's instantly you understand it. You don't need to read like this huge guide on, oh, so this is how this thing works,
Right,
which
exactly.
unfortunately some fantasy falls into sometimes.
That's very true, and I think that honestly, I think that kind of keeps people from wanting to explore fantasy. It makes it too intimidating. But when you can offer somebody an experience where things are just familiar enough that your readers or your audience can figure out the rules, as it were, while still enjoying fresh twists and aesthetic and whatnot. I think that's a really great offering to be able to give.
Exactly. You just have to balance it out.
Exactly. Yes.
And Tete said his illustrations, referring to Amano, for the Vampire Hunter D series were just phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
Yes, they were.
Absolutely. He did a volume also of Sandman with Neil Gaiman, and it is stunning. Absolutely stunning.
I need to see that. That's very interesting. I never knew that he did collabs with superhero, writers.
Yeah, And it's funny because I feel like Gaiman kind of straddles that line as well. Like you know, he does fantasy, he does superhero, he does. I mean, he really straddles genres, and so does Amano, and really work well together. They both have
Mhm.
a very acute sense of the elegant macabre.
Mhm. And Teti says Miyazaki creates some of the most immersive worlds in fictional settings. Agreed. Yeah, like
Absolutely
every
agree.
detail just, adds so much to the setting and it just really draws you in without having to info dump you.
Yeah.
It's just enough to get you immersed. Right. So behind the Totoro, is that Lady Oscar?
Oh, that is such a close guess, and I have sunk into the Rose of Versailles
Oh.
mania. That is actually the title character of Ryoko Ikeda's Claudine, which is a
Oh.
shorter piece, but that one is another manga that one of the probably the primary theme is questioning um, gender roles and that kind of thing, and it really struck me, especially as a piece having been written in the 70s, which of course some of the language is outdated as far as like what terminology they use. Um, but it struck me how deep and how compassionate it was. I was That is not something I would have expected from um I don't know. It just wasn't something I was expecting from manga, but I think that's another great thing about it is that the more I read it, the more I explore manga, the more it surprises me, and that's a delightful adventure.
Mhm, definitely. There's definitely a lot of classics in the 70s and 80s.
Absolutely. As a Gundam fan, I'm all for older anime. That's been going since the 70s as well, and um it always has something to say, and it had so much to say even then.
Mhm, definitely. And behind, Sailor Moon is the Phoenix, right?
Yeah, so kind of the manga that changed the way I look at graphic novels and the way I looked at storytelling at the time was Osamu Tezuka's Phoenix series, which I think only takes place across one universe, but he kind of renames things. But it'll skip between, like, one volume is set in prehistory and another volume is set in the, distant future, and and it kind of just leaps back and forth in between until you kind of get a meeting in the middle towards the end of the series. And I thought that was just such an interesting way to play with telling a story over time and directing your audience towards what you want them to see and what they need to see to understand the story as you're trying to tell it.
Mhm, absolutely. And I can really see the influence of a Phoenix on your work, with different worlds and, just showing enough to give us an idea of what's happening, but never overloading us.
Yeah, that is a struggle to balance, especially when you're an author and you have all these ideas and you know where you want to put them, but you know as time goes on you have to kind of rearrange things
Mhm.
so that you can guide your it's almost like composition in a painting because you're guiding the viewer's eyes around the canvas with that.
Mhm.
um so it's a very careful balance that takes requires a lot of patience.
It does. And this actually kind of reminds me of something that Tete and I talked about. Yeah, she's saying Tezuka's use of graphic really modernized and standardized manga across the board. Yeah, it did. And
Yeah.
it's interesting that Tezuka's style was influenced by Disney. The big eyes.
Yeah, it kind of went back and forth. I've heard that another really big influence on early anime was actually Betty Boop, which makes a lot
Mhm.
of sense. Big eyes, tiny mouth. She had her hair had these, come to think of it, the way her hair was shaped is pretty similar actually to how in Tezuka's work, when he has someone with curly hair, it looks very similar. The
Mhm.
way that it's drawn and shaded in, and it's very simple. No matter what direction she's facing, it looks the same, much like Astro Boy's does.
But he's a
um,
robot, so that makes sense.
I mean, yeah, but it has. I think Tezuka actually said he designed Astro's hair so that no matter what direction he was facing, he could always draw it the same way. Because when you're drawing it panel after panel after panel, you want something that's repeatable without being exhausting.
Mhm, that's very true. But yes, what I was saying about Tete's conversation about, the complexity of these worlds, we were talking about superhero comics, and one of the big problems in our viewpoint with a lot of superhero comics is that it's overly complex, making
Mm,
it impossible for people who are not longtime fans of the universe to really understand what's happening. So
yeah,
I tried and attempted to read multiple Superman comics, and it was impossible for me to understand because there were so many Earths. So in the Superman universe, there's like a billion alternate universes,
yeah,
and there's like Earth One, Earth Two, Earth Three, and there's like so many. Like just so much information and so many alternate versions of different people. So it's
yeah,
very easy to get confused and overwhelmed.
yeah. You shouldn't need a prerequisite class to read a comic book.
I know, that's what I don't like, because I wanna be able to jump into a story and kind of understand what's happening at least, right? But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
tried with a lot of Superman comics, and the only one that I could really get into was Red Sun, which had narration. It had
Yeah,
these boxes introducing the story, the premise, and what was going on in the main character's head. Unfortunately, a lot of the other ones I tried out, they didn't have that. So, you're
okay.
just thrown into this universe and people are talking about things that you don't know what they are. And then there's like this huge TLDR text about, oh, something about Earth One.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you don't understand what's happening.
It's almost like another language at that point, and I think that's another way that, specifically the way Phoenix was, formatted really appealed to me was, again, like, each volume took place during a particular period of time, but each one was also its own encapsulated story while still being a continuous narrative, and that was just brilliant to me because I definitely had a lot of frustration with reading about the same characters over and over and over again, basically doing the same things, but with a different veneer, a different theme, maybe, but kind of like, in a very Magic Tree House kind of way. That
Hmm.
that just kind of that would really get old for me. But Tezuka's, and especially because Phoenix is about reincarnation and it's about living like a person's consciousness learning lessons over different lifetimes but still facing the same struggles no matter what era they're born into. There's definitely this theme of rebirth and the next rebirth knowing something a little bit more than the last one did, because you kind of go back and forth between the future one that did pretty okay for himself and the maybe medieval one that really had a hard life and
Hmm.
did not learn from his struggles.
Exactly. Right. And this is what you're doing with your story as well.
Yeah. And I'm trying, as much as it's about reincarnation, it's also about just accepting the multifaceted nature of personhood. Just that none of us is one thing. There, you just
Hmm.
can't. It's okay to embrace the fact that your identity can have different faces and different sides.
Hmm. Exactly. Right. So Tete said Fleischer Animation was very innovative for pioneering animation, such as iconic characters as Betty Boop and their take with the Superman theatrical serials in the early 40s.
Yeah. Oh, Fleischer was really, um, informative to its time. I think they also did. I think they also did the rotoscopes of Cab Calloway, which actually leads us to the pumpkin, but we'll get to that. There were Betty Boop cartoons that would feature early oh gosh, what is the name of this animation? Rotoscoping of Cab
Mhm.
Calloway, and they would rotoscope him into these incredible characters that danced, with his movements, but it looked so eerie because of the way that it was done. And they would just kind of fit that into the Betty Boop cartoon. I mean, it was mind blowing stuff. It had just such a unique aesthetic and appeal.
Mhm. So the pumpkin, is it from Over the Garden Wall?
Yes. Over the Garden Wall is one of my favorite pieces of media. I watch it all the time. Just I adore it. I love the music. I love the art style. I love the story. There's just everything about it is so well balanced and well executed. I just love that show.
It is, and, in many ways, I think it's like an American version of Ghibli.
Yeah, I would say in an aesthetic way, you could definitely make that comparison. I mean, the look is iconic. It's very folk art inspired, but still cartoonish enough that it's just a nice in between where you can suspend some disbelief, but you still have a very set tangible sense of what's happening around, in this
Mhm.
picture. I just that show is so incredible.
Mhm.
And the art style definitely influenced me. And there are actually comic books that continue the adventures of Wirt and Greg, and they carry that folk art flavor, of course, with variations when different artists are taking over. But it's iconic. It's just absolutely iconic.
It definitely is, and there's that gothic feel as well.
Oh yeah, it definitely has a spooky vibe, and I am for it. I love the spooky vibe. It's great.
Mhm. And below the pumpkin is Art Nouveau.
Yeah, so that is sort of my rendition, my hastily improvised rendition of Alphonse Mucha's Job cigarette paper advertisement. It was one of several. Um, his work in particular is super influential to me, and it's funny that we're at that. This really is kind of a past to present, I guess. Because like I said, I tried to draw anime for a really long time, and drawing anime taught me a lot about character design and proportions and drawing clothes, which is something that's huge within my art style and just in and of itself. Um, but it never quite looked right. When I tried to draw anime, it just didn't really look like anime. And when really started to play with what I wanted things to look like, it wound up looking very nouveau. And the more I got into it and the more that I explored that, and the more I just loved the Art Nouveau movement and this sense of symbolism and a certain amount of artistic mysticism and opulence for the sake of opulence. Again, just being beauty for the sake of being beautiful. Um,
Mhm.
and I think I definitely see the parallels between Art Nouveau and early anime in, um, these very particular poses and the way that the hair is illustrated almost strand by strand, and um, how it's really more the idea of how something feels in a scene, like Sailor Moon's transformation.
Mhm.
It's about how she feels when she becomes Sailor Moon, and that's what we visually see on the screen.
That's true. And also another similarity is the line art, I think.
Yeah, I would absolutely say the line art is, I mean, the careful attention to textures and fabrics, and again, the hair and, flowers that there's kind of a, I don't even know how old the trope is of, in anime and in manga, framing a character with these intricate roses for a frame, just to kind of give us that. picture of romanticizing that person for a second, and it's very Nouveau. Just,
Mhm.
the way that it's styled, I can absolutely see the parallels.
Absolutely. Unlike the other art styles like, romanticism, for example, which doesn't have line art because it's just, photorealism.
Yeah, and even, the Pre-Raphaelite movement, which is one of my other favorite art movements, it's not focused on line work. It's focused more on, a kind of photorealism where you get a sense for more real textures.
Mhm. Right, and shading and
Yes,
lighting. Yeah.
exactly.
So Tete Bang said, "Over the Garden Wall had so much mystique, charm. It really immersed us not only into the world, but the subconscious questioning of existence."
Oh my
It's been
gosh, yes.
7 years since I watched it, so I can't quite remember, but I was quite touched by the end. And, it really stands out from, unfortunately, a lot of modern American cartoons, which me and Tete have critiqued many times.
Yeah,
Things like, Invader Zim, Fairly Odd Parents, right? And
yeah.
those kind of things, they have their place, definitely, but it has a very different feel.
Even Invader Zim was super different than what most I mean, I would say that one was the most grim, the most bleak, and I think that it spoke to a lot of kids. Personally, I didn't watch it when I was target age, but I know people who did, and as I watch it, I begin to see that, kids like me who loved the macabre but were in a little more normal
Mm,
growing up situation would have loved that show because it's grim, but it decides to make a dark joke out of the realities they already had to deal with.
mhm.
Um,
That's true.
Whereas for me, like, Over the Garden Wall appealed to everything I love. It appeals to the folklore and fairy tale enthusiast. It um, the historical musician and fashion, researcher, I don't know what you wanna call it,
Mhm.
enthusiast, in me. It's and also as someone who, really loves delving into the history of early film and early animation, this show has so many great nods to all of those things, while still presenting a hugely important lesson for kids that they they get to keep control of their narrative.
Mhm.
Um, I think I'll always kind of be um I still remember watching the show for the first time and in some of the final episodes just kind of being shook by how the beast was represented and like wow, they really put that on screen. It was just um it was a huge moment for me, and I felt just so much less alone in a
Mhm.
strange way. Like, okay, somebody else gets it.
Right. Right,
But
that's
also
definitely true.
yeah,
Mhm.
and to give Wirt
Right.
that moment when he says, "No, this is stupid. I'm not gonna do this." That's something that not a lot of kids media chooses to do, so I was intrigued for sure.
That's true. But yeah, Invader Zim definitely had its appeal. I guess my point was more about the art style, which
Mm.
unfortunately, according to me and Tete, just our personal opinion, doesn't look that appealing. It looks very oversimplified. The colors are kind of basic. And, something like Over the Garden Wall has a more refined palette, like less simplified.
It really does, and it's interesting what details they choose to latch onto because those are, you know, conscious artistic choices. Whereas, like you said, with stuff like Invader Zim and even what was I watching? I was watching Amphibia recently, which the story is kind of interesting, but the art style just does not
Mhm.
like it doesn't flip my trigger. I don't know how else to put that, but it just doesn't. I'm like, okay, this is bland, but Over the Garden Wall it had such a purposeful aesthetic, and, it's one that's immediately kinda like I was saying earlier, kinda nostalgic, it's definitely like, "Oh, this is familiar, you know what this is," but then it kinda flips that on its head.
Mhm, right. So underneath Art Nouveau, well, there's two things I see. I see Finn from Adventure Time, and next to your shoulder, I'm not really sure which that character is. I think I've
Okay.
seen. Is it Steven Universe?
No. So that character is, I doubt many people would recognize him. That is Tack, the cobbler from The Thief and the Cobbler, which is I mean, it's kind of a long story, but it's a movie by the animator behind Roger Rabbit. And it was kind of his passion project for several decades. And it's really tragic. Honestly, it's an unfinished animated film that quintessentially got ripped by Disney. And then they even went so far as to buy the rights, finish it out with a cheap production studio, like literally take the project from him and the rights to it from him. And
Hmm.
some people are familiar with a cut that's, I think, called The Princess and the Cobbler, that is, it's not what Richard Williams was making, but there is a sort of restored, it's called the Recobbled Cut, that's available on YouTube. I highly recommend, even though it is unfinished and some sequences are, and it's not perfect, clearly. It's kind of like a moving piece of art, and that really struck me. And the artistic style that he has, that can go between stylized fine art and Looney Tunes at the drop of a hat, uh, is very striking and so fun to watch. And it's just an absolutely beautifully animated piece of art.
Hmm. Yeah, I see. I was just Googling it. So it seems like Tack always has nails in his mouth. I was a bit confused by that at first.
Yeah, so he has these two little tacks, and as you watch him in the animation, the two tacks kind of turn in his mouth in a way that you would expect that to do. But the lines that they make form his expression of his mouth, and he never speaks through the
Oh,
whole
I
film.
see.
Um, yeah, I thought that's just a brilliant choice. His design is very striking, and I love that character for a multitude of reasons.
Mhm. So Tete said Art Nouveau and vintage anime and manga definitely share many similarities, especially with their flowing slope of line and use of light, airy aesthetics.
Oh,
Agreed.
well put. Well put,
Hmm.
Tay.
And then she says the thief and the cobbler was very beautiful.
Oh, I'm so glad you've watched it. I oh, beautiful details.
The animator did many beautiful details, with so much detail called Ethel, especially their work being influenced by more vintage textures.
Yeah, he actually based a lot of the landscapes in that film off of Persian miniatures. He did so much research, and honestly, as someone who read a lot of folk and fairy tales from Persia and other parts of the Middle East, I would say that even the choice of humor that he uses is very accurate to the storytelling voice of those stories, and I was just deeply impressed. It's
I
really
see.
fantastic.
That's awesome. I should check it out sometime.
Yeah, and that actually, so we'll talk about Finn. We'll still talk about Adventure Time, but next to Tack, you'll see this very stylized cat. That's Pengerban from The Secret of Kells, which was the
Mm.
first cartoon saloon motion picture release. They're an animation studio out of Ireland, and they said their artistic inspiration was in part The Thief and the Cobbler, and you can really see it in a lot of their work. This way that they make these simplified shapes express so much. They also did Song of the Sea. One of their more recent films was Wolf Walkers. I believe they also animated for Breadwinner, which was, I think, an
Oh, I
Oscar
remember
award
that.
winning. Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
they animated for that one. Um, but the ones that are released as just Cartoon Saloon are done in house, and they hire Irish voice actors and they hiring these incredible people. They're just absolutely gorgeous films. And the way that they use shapes as its own form of expressionism, it almost feels more towards the side of Nouveau where you see your Klimt, like using abstract shapes, but working them uh, into a bigger picture.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I actually watched the Book of Kells before. I haven't seen their other works, but it was very impressive. I really
Oh
love the
yeah,
textures. I can definitely see what you mean by the Klimt influence. The backgrounds are just really, really overwhelming with so much beautiful details. And then you suddenly see the main characters who are, quite simplified, but they are also very appealing in a
yeah.
way that I would say, unfortunately, Invader Zim did not appeal to me. But
And I was
this
going to say,
simplification is good.
even Tezuka, for having, he did definitely have some moments of shoujo opulence in some of his work, but Tezuka was also kind of a minimalist, and you can see him express so much, he say so much with so few lines. And I think that's something that Cartoon Saloon also does in spades, is they
Mhm.
say so much without overwhelming, you know, the senses in a certain way. My favorite of theirs personally is Song of the Sea, but I figured Pangarban would be more recognizable, so that was. Oh, and Dulac, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've looked up a couple others. Like there was an Italian painter who also leaned into that end of. I think it was sort of the where Nouveau was evolving into Deco.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, absolutely. Dulac would be definitely another one to um, compare it to.
Mhm. Well, how about Adventure Time? That's the last one.
I love Adventure Time. I think Adventure Time on the whole, like I love the art style. I don't think I can really replicate it, but I do love the way that their character designs are so recognizable and so effective at communicating that, Jake can take any shape, literally any shape you can think of, but you still know it's Jake just based on, something very simple like his eyes or his muzzle still being there or something.
Mhm.
Or even Finn, we understand that when his arms are wiggling like that, his bones haven't broken. It's an expression. It's showing us how he feels more than, any
Exactly.
realistic kind of anatomy.
Well, will you be doing that with your series?
I would like to throw a little bit of that in, especially in places where there's more dream logic at play. Um, I would love to play with that, and different volumes will have some different styles and different aesthetics. I would say that the first volume is definitely going to be a little more along the lines of Over the Garden Wall, where it's, kind of understated. It's pretty simple. Um, emphasis is where it's wanted and where it's needed. Um, but I would say that one uh, one thing I want to play with, particularly with the Book of Ka, is kind of like I'm sure I've described before, but in early film, there were techniques to attempt to colorize for moods. So, like, they'd put a yellow filter over everything to make it daylight, um, or a blue filter on during nighttime scenes, or a red one during like an exciting or scary scene, and it tinted instead of being sepia, it would be all shades of whatever color they picked.
Mhm.
So I definitely want to play with that, especially considering um, the Book of Ka takes place from 1916 to 1926. So that would be some of the beginnings of film. So we're kind of seeing through Laurel's cultural lens, in that sense, how the story
Mhm. Mhm.
unfolds.
That makes sense. I like that. That's really interesting and adds a lot of texture to it.
Yeah, I wanted to play with that because I want to keep it clear that as much as it is one narrative, we are experiencing a lot of different characters' individual stories. This whole thing is Josephine's story, yes, but it's also Laurel's story and Melindore's story and so on and so forth. And, there are many others. Um, and that they each have their own feelings about what's going on and what's happening.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Exactly. Right. So that's all of the influences, right?
Yeah. Um, I would say another artist that, if I can sneak in one more that I didn't get to put in, one artist that definitely I think influenced me a lot was Nalesh Mystery, who is an illustrator and artist out of Bombay, I believe. He illustrated a book called The Seven Wise Princesses that I absolutely just pored over for hours, and I still do because it appealed to that um, the whimsy as well as the nouveau, and it's a certain balance of stylism and realism. I would say definitely look up his work. He's on Instagram. He's
Hmm.
an incredible artist, and he was a huge influence in how I developed in my own style as an artist.
Hmm.
I learned a lot from his work.
Right. And what media will you be using to create your series? Will your line art be in pencil and the coloring digital, for instance? I recall that back in 2021, you said that you would be using Procreate to color your drawings. Has that changed?
So what I'd like to do is, yes, I would like to, yes, that is his name, um, Vimislik. So I would like to draw my panels with graphite, and for the most part, yes, digital coloring and adjustment. I would, however, like to do some pages with watercolors, and I would love to do cover art also with watercolors and gouache, just to give it a little special touch, and I might play with I might actually also play with some textures and kind of collage a little bit. Again, particularly in places that are in parts of the work that take place in abstract settings,
Hmm.
in kind of a Madoka Magica way. Did you watch that
Oh, yeah,
show?
of course. It's one of my
Yeah,
favorites.
it's
Yeah.
a great show.
Yeah, it
I
is.
was struck by the way every time they faced a witch, there was this change of texture and this, you could immediately grasp again the feeling of what it felt like to be inside that person's mind, which is so like that's so
Mhm.
sad.
I love it.
But
Yeah.
it's so impactful, and I would love to play with that
Mhm.
in certain parts of the books, yeah.
Yes, it's perfect. Yeah, I love their use of color and imagery, and, it really sucks you into some of the characters because, spoiler alert, some of them become the villains, in a
Yeah.
twist, and basically you get to see how crushed they are when they realize the truth.
Yeah, and it's also something that as an audience, it's like a little puzzle we put together of who that person was before they devolved into that, and just, what it feels like to be inside their head. I just absolutely loved that about that show,
Mhm, absolutely. One of the best anime.
for sure.
Definitely. So, will there be stylistic changes depending on what book or world we're in? For example, would the Book of Ket have a slightly different style than the Book of Ba?
Um, I think about that a lot because I know that the first two books will be pretty similar except in their color schemes, really. Um, but I think that there will be. I think that there will be, first of all, because these are books where not only the main character is changing throughout the book, but the audience, as they follow it, as these years come out, these people are changing. And I think that's
Hmm.
something to keep in mind. And I think that, during that time, I will also change, as a person and as an artist. I don't know how
Hmm.
long this will take, and I'm resigned to that fact.
Hmm.
So, I'm sure there are things that I'll learn and I'll do differently as an artist that will impact the way that this is put on paper in the future.
Absolutely. I think every artist and writer has that as well, because a lot of works do take many years to complete. So it evolves with them.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been great to be back.
It's so fascinating. I can't wait to see more art for this series.
I am looking forward to drawing more.
All right. See you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining Tete and everyone else.
Yes, thanks for joining.
Bye.